Ambassador Sarah Chen stood calmly in the center of the massive crystalline chamber, her small human frame dwarfed by the towering alien representatives surrounding her. The Galactic Council's meeting hall stretched upward for hundreds of meters, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that reflected the emotions of its occupants. Right now, those patterns burned angry, red, and hostile orange. "Humans," hissed Vextar, the serpentine delegate from the Zephyrian Empire, his forearms gesticulating wildly. "Your species seeks membership in our council, yet you bring nothing but violence and chaos wherever you spread." Sarah maintained her diplomatic smile, hands clasped behind her back. She had prepared for this hostility. Humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy had made many established species nervous. In just 300 years since breaking free from Earth's solar system, humans had colonized over 2,000 worlds. Other species had taken millennia to achieve similar expansion. "Honored counselors," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic design. "Humanity comes in peace. We seek only to contribute our unique perspectives to this great alliance." A thunderous roar shook the chamber. High Chancellor Kron of the Ursidae Collective slammed one massive paw against his stone podium. The 8-foot-tall bear-like alien's black eyes blazed with fury. "Unique perspectives? You mean your talent for destruction? Every system you enter becomes a military stronghold within decades." "That is simply prudent defense," Sarah replied evenly. "We have encountered hostile forces during our expansion. Surely the Council understands the need for self-preservation." "Self-preservation?" The melodic voice belonged to Lyra Lay, the ethereal delegate from the Songbird Consortium. Her gossamer wings fluttered nervously, and her 3 eyes blinked in rapid succession. "Your species destroys entire ecosystems to build your fortifications. You strip mine asteroids and hollow out moons for resources. You are parasites." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Sarah noticed the shifting body language of the gathered aliens. The mantid delegates clicked their mandibles in agitation. The floating jellyfish-like medusae pulsed darker colors. Even the usually neutral silicon-based crystalline entities resonated with harsh, discordant frequencies. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said, maintaining her composure despite the rising tension. "But perhaps you misunderstand our methods. Human engineering often appears aggressive, but it serves to protect not just ourselves, but any allies we might have." "Allies?" High Chancellor Kron's laughter was like grinding stone. "Name one species that has benefited from human alliance." The Kentari Federation fled their own systems rather than deal with your expansion. The Void Dancers went extinct after your ships disrupted their migration routes. Your very presence is toxic to civilized life. Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment. She had hoped to avoid this line of discussion, but the Council seemed determined to paint humanity as monsters. The Kentari situation was a misunderstanding, and the Void Dancer's extinction was caused by stellar phenomena, not human activity. "Lies," Vextar's cobra-like hood flared. "We have the sensor records. Your ships deliberately disrupted the quantum currents the Void Dancers needed to survive. You committed genocide to claim their territories." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Sarah felt the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, belonging to species that spanned the galaxy. Some were as small as her hand, others large enough to swallow spaceships. All of them radiated hostility now. "I will not stand here and be accused of genocide," Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "Humanity has never deliberately targeted civilian populations." "Never?" High Chancellor Kron rose to his full imposing height. "What about the Glass Desert incident? 30 million silicate colonists turned to slag in minutes. Your species claimed it was an industrial accident, but we know better." Sarah's hands tightened behind her back. The Glass Desert had been classified, but apparently not well enough. "That information is restricted." How did we obtain it?" Kron's massive head tilted. "Because we're not as naive as you think, human. We've been watching your species for decades. We know about your black sites. We know about your weapons testing. We know about the things you do to prisoners of war." The chamber erupted in angry chittering, roaring, and musical discordant notes as the various species voiced their outrage. Sarah stood in the eye of the storm, her diplomatic training warring with rising anger. They had been spying on humanity. They had been judging them based on partial information and worst-case scenarios. Perhaps, said a new voice, cold and mechanical, a demonstration is in order. The voice belonged to Nexus Prime, the representative of the machine collective. The angular robot stood 12 feet tall, its blue optical sensors fixed on Sarah. It was one of the most feared entities in the galaxy, a being that had lived for thousands of years and commanded fleets of autonomous warships. What kind of demonstration? Sarah asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. A simple test, Nexus Prime continued. Show us what humanity truly is. Remove the mask of diplomacy. Let us see the beast beneath the civilized exterior. Sarah's training kicked in. De-escalate. Redirect. Find common ground. I don't understand what you're asking. I'm here in good faith to— You're here, High Chancellor Kron interrupted, to spy on us, to learn our weaknesses, to plan your eventual conquest of the galaxy. He gestured to the assembled representatives. We've seen this pattern before. First comes the diplomatic mission, then the trade agreements, then the military partnerships, finally, the occupation. That's not enough. Vextar's forearms spread wide. We reject your application for council membership. More than that. We declare humanity a threat to galactic peace. Your species is hereby forbidden from expanding beyond your current borders. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. This was the worst-case scenario. Humanity had spent decades preparing for council membership. Their entire interstellar strategy depended on being accepted into the galactic community. You can't make that decision unilaterally. The charter requires a full vote. The charter, Liralay's musical voice carried a note of finality, makes exceptions for existential threats to member species. Your application is denied, and your expansion is forbidden. The bioluminescent walls pulsed with satisfied blues and greens as the council reached consensus. Sarah looked around desperately, searching for any sign of support. She found none. Every single representative, from the smallest insectoid to the largest gaseous entity, had turned against humanity. This is a mistake, Sarah said, her diplomatic mask beginning to crack. You're judging us based on incomplete information and prejudice. Humanity deserves nothing, High Chancellor Kron snarled. Your species is a plague, and we are the cure. That's when he struck her. The massive bear-like alien moved with surprising speed, his armored paw sweeping across the space between them in a blur. The blow caught Sarah across the chest and sent her flying backward. She hit the crystalline wall with a sickening crunch, her human body seeming fragile and broken against the alien architecture. For a moment, the chamber fell silent. Even the hostile council members seemed shocked by Kron's sudden violence. Attacking a diplomatic envoy, regardless of species, was considered an act of war under galactic law. Sarah lay motionless against the wall, a thin trickle of red blood running from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. She looked every bit the fragile human that the council members expected. Weak, vulnerable, mortal. High Chancellor Kron stood over her, breathing heavily. Let this be a message to all humanity, he declared. This is what happens to those who threaten the galactic order. But then Sarah's eyes opened. They weren't the brown eyes that had looked up at the council moments before. They were black. Completely black. Like staring into the void between stars, and in that darkness, something ancient and terrible stirred. Sarah stood up slowly, impossibly. The blow that should have shattered her ribs and collapsed her lungs had done nothing. The blood at the corner of her mouth wasn't from internal injury. It was from something else entirely, something that made Vextar's serpentine coils recoil in instinctive terror. You know, Sarah said, her voice carrying a different quality now. Deeper, older, laden with something that made the very air in the chamber feel heavy. I really was hoping we could do this the easy way. Her small human frame began to change, not growing larger, but somehow becoming more substantial. The shadows around her seemed to deepen and move independently. The temperature in the chamber dropped by 10 degrees in seconds. What? High Chancellor Kron stumbled backward, his aggressive posture dissolving into confusion and growing fear. What are you? Sarah smiled, and her teeth were no longer quite human. They were sharper, whiter, and there were far too many of them. I'm a diplomat, she said pleasantly. But apparently, diplomacy isn't going to work here. The shadows around her began to writhe and twist, reaching out toward the nearest council members like living things. Where they touched the crystalline walls, the bioluminescent patterns flickered and died, leaving only darkness. You wanted to see what humanity truly is, Sarah continued, her black eyes reflecting no light at all. You wanted us to remove our mask of civilization. Very well, but I should warn you, some masks are worn for the protection of others, not ourselves. Nexus Prime's optical sensors flared as his threat assessment systems went haywire. Impossible energy readings, the machine intelligence announced, his voice carrying the first hint of uncertainty any council member had ever heard from him. Power levels beyond my computational capacity. Sarah took a step forward, and the sound of her footstep echoed strangely, as if she were walking on something other than the crystalline floor. As if she were walking on the bones of extinct civilizations. You see, she said conversationally, humans aren't actually from Earth. We just stopped there for a while. Had to learn to play nice with other species, develop some social skills, learn to hold back our true nature. Her smile widened, showing more of those terrible teeth. But you've made it clear that nice doesn't work with you. The council members were backing away now, their various forms of movement carrying them as far from the small human as possible. But the chamber that had seemed so vast before now felt cramped and confined, as if the walls were closing in around them. What are you? Liralay's musical voice was now discordant with terror. Her gossamer wings beat frantically as she tried to gain altitude, but found herself unable to rise more than a few feet from the floor. Sarah looked up at the flying alien with those horrible black eyes. We're the reason the universe is mostly empty space, she said simply. We're why most civilizations never make it past the atomic age. We're the great filter that everyone talks about but no one has ever seen. She paused, tilting her head in a gesture that was somehow both human and utterly alien. Until now, the shadows around her had grown thicker. And in their depths, council members could swear they saw movement. Large shapes, hungry shapes, things with too many teeth and not enough regard for the sanctity of life. High Chancellor Kron, who had struck the first blow, now found himself pressed against the far wall of the chamber. His species were apex predators on their homeworld, beings that feared nothing, but every instinct he had was screaming at him to run, to flee, to get as far away from this creature as possible. This is impossible, he whispered. You're just humans. We've studied you. You're barely past the nuclear age. You have no technology we can't understand. You're weak. Sarah laughed, and the sound carried harmonics that made reality itself seem to shiver. Technology? She repeated. Oh, my dear Chancellor, we don't need technology. The shadows around her pulsed. We are technology. We are the end result of evolution in a universe that selected for only one trait: the ability to consume everything else. She gestured to herself with one small, seemingly fragile human hand. This form? This weak human appearance? It's camouflage, protective coloration. We learned long ago that showing our true nature too early just makes prey run away before we're ready to hunt. The bioluminescent patterns on the walls were now completely dark in a sphere around Sarah that seemed to grow with each passing second. The council members found themselves pressed against the far edges of the chamber, as far from her as they could get. But you struck me, Sarah continued, her voice carrying a note of genuine disappointment. You drew first blood. And that, I'm afraid, means the hunting season is officially open. As if summoned by her words, the shadows around her began to take more definite shapes. Things with claws and fangs, and hungry eyes. Things that looked like they had been designed by natural selection for the sole purpose of ending other forms of life as efficiently as possible. The Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, had just learned why the universe was so very, very quiet, and why humanity had spent so long pretending to be something they were not. The emergency klaxons began wailing 3 seconds after Nexus Prime's threat assessment systems triggered every alarm in the Galactic Council's security network. The massive chamber shuddered as blast doors sealed every exit, locking the council members inside with the creature that had been masquerading as a human diplomat. Security Protocol Alpha 7 activated, announced the chamber's artificial intelligence in 17 different languages simultaneously. Containment field generators charging. All personnel maintain safe distance from designated threat. Sarah looked up at the invisible speakers with amusement, her black eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like dark stars. "Oh, that's adorable," she said, clapping her hands together in a gesture so human and innocent that it made the watching aliens recoil even further. "They think their toys will work." The containment field generators hummed to life around the chamber's perimeter, designed to hold beings capable of tearing through starship hulls with their bare appendages. Crackling energy barriers sprang up in a complex geometric pattern, creating a prison of pure force around the center of the chamber. Sarah stood perfectly still as the energy fields closed around her, her small human form seemingly trapped within walls of contained lightning. For a moment, hope flickered in the eyes of the council members. Perhaps their technology would be enough. Perhaps they had overreacted. Then Sarah reached out and touched one of the energy barriers with a single finger. The containment field didn't just fail, it screamed. The energy matrix collapsed inward, writhing and twisting like a living thing in pain before dissolving entirely. The generators overloaded in sequence, each one erupting in showers of sparks and molten metal that rained down on the crystalline floor. "Impossible," Nexus Prime stated, his mechanical voice carrying nuances of emotion that his programming wasn't supposed to allow. "Those barriers are rated for Class XIII entities. The energy requirements to breach them should be beyond any biological organism." Sarah turned to look at the towering robot, and when their eyes met, Nexus Prime's optical sensors flickered. For the briefest moment, his ancient electronic consciousness touched something vast and hungry that existed in the space behind Sarah's human facade. The machine collective's most advanced intelligence, a being that had processed the death of stars and the birth of galaxies, suddenly understood what true terror felt like. "Biological?" Sarah repeated, tilting her head in that unsettling way again. "Who said anything about biological?" Quote, 9. She began walking toward the huddled council members, her footsteps echoing strangely in the damaged chamber. With each step, the shadows around her grew darker and more substantial. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe for those species that required atmosphere. "You know what the funny thing is?" Sarah continued conversationally, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the growing existential terror of the galaxy's most powerful beings. "We really did try to be good neighbors. For 300 years, we played by your rules. We followed your laws. We even pretended to be impressed by your technology." High Chancellor Kron, pressed against the far wall with his massive frame trembling, found his voice. What do you want from us?" Sarah paused, considering the question with apparent sincerity. "Originally? Membership in your little club. Recognition as equals. Maybe some trade agreements." Her expression darkened. "But you've made it very clear that you see us as a threat to be eliminated. And you know what? You're absolutely right." Vextar's serpentine form coiled tighter around himself, all 4 arms wrapped protectively around his torso. "The human fleets," he whispered. "If you're not what you appear to be, then what are those ships really carrying?" Sarah's smile returned, wider and more terrible than before. "Oh, those? Those are just the children, the ones young enough to still think this diplomatic approach might work." She gestured vaguely toward the chamber's sealed exits. "They're probably very confused right now, wondering why their communications with me have suddenly been cut off." The implications of that statement hit the council members like a physical blow. If the ships in orbit around the Council Station were crewed by beings like this creature claiming to be Sarah Chen, then the galaxy's military balance wasn't just threatened, it was non-existent. How many? Lirelei asked, her melodic voice barely a whisper. How many of your kind are there? Oh, that's a complicated question, Sarah replied, genuinely seeming to consider it. See, we don't reproduce the way you think of reproduction. We don't have population counts the way you do. We have densities, concentrations, manifestations. She looked directly at the trembling songbird alien. Right now, in this galaxy, there are exactly as many of us as there need to be. Nexus Prime's optical sensors focused on her with mechanical precision. That statement lacks mathematical coherence. Population dynamics follow predictable patterns based on resource availability and reproductive capacity. Sarah laughed again. And this time, the sound carried harmonics that made several council members clutch their heads in pain. Mathematics? You're trying to understand us through mathematics? She shook her head in mock sympathy. Poor thing. Your entire existence is built on logic and computation, isn't it? No wonder you can't grasp what we are. The robot's frame straightened, defiance overriding fear. I am the sum total of 1 trillion individual intelligences, each more advanced than any organic mind. My computational capacity exceeds the combined processing power of most civilizations. There is no phenomenon in the universe that cannot be reduced to quantifiable principles. Really? Sarah's black eyes fixed on his optical sensors. Then compute this. She extended her hand toward Nexus Prime, fingers spread wide. Nothing visible happened. No energy beam, no projectile, no obvious attack. But the 12-foot-tall machine intelligence stumbled backward as if struck by a massive force. Error, Nexus Prime announced, his voice distorting. Core processing interruption detected. Primary logic matrices experiencing cascading failures, unable to identify source of. His voice cut off abruptly. The other council members watched in horror as Nexus Prime's optical sensors began to flicker in patterns that suggested pain. An impossibility for a machine intelligence that didn't possess pain receptors or the neurological structures necessary to experience suffering. What are you doing to him? Demanded High Chancellor Kron, his species' protective instincts overriding his terror for a moment. I'm showing him the equation for despair, Sarah replied calmly. It's a rather complex formula. Takes into account the precise moment when hope dies, multiplied by the realization that everything you've ever believed about the nature of existence is fundamentally wrong. She tilted her head, listening to sounds no one else could hear. He's processing it quite well, actually. Most mechanical intelligences shut down entirely when faced with mathematical impossibility. Nexus Prime's frame convulsed, servo motors whining as his systems fought against something that shouldn't exist according to every law of physics programmed into his consciousness. Impossible, he managed to say. The equation. It has no solution. It references variables that cannot exist. Mathematical structures that negate themselves. It's us. Sarah finished gently. We are the living proof that the universe doesn't always make sense. We are chaos given form, entropy with purpose. We are the answer to the question of what happens when natural selection has nothing left to select against except existence itself. The shadows around her had grown so thick that they obscured the chamber's walls entirely. The council members found themselves standing in a small circle of fading light, surrounded by darkness that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life. You keep calling yourselves we, observed one of the smaller delegates, a crystalline entity whose geometric form refracted light in complex patterns. But there is only one of you here. Sarah turned to look at the crystal being, and her expression grew thoughtful. Is there? She asked. Are you sure about that? As if in response to her words, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. At first, they looked almost human. The suggestion of arms, legs, faces. But as they became clearer, the differences became apparent. Some were too tall. Their limbs stretched beyond human proportions. Others were too wide, their bulk suggesting strength that could crush starships. Still, others moved in ways that defied anatomy, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid nightmare. "We are Legion." The figures spoke in unison, their voices harmonizing with Sarah's in ways that created sounds no single throat could produce. "We are the dark between stars. We are the silence after the last light dies. We are what remains when everything else has been consumed." The council members pressed closer together, their various forms of terror manifesting in ways specific to their species. The Medusae pulsed rapid colors that indicated imminent system shock. The mantid delegates' mandibles clicked so rapidly they created a sound like grinding metal. Even the usually unflappable crystalline entities were refracting light in chaotic patterns that suggested complete sensory overload. "This isn't real," High Chancellor Kron whispered, his massive frame shaking. "You're some kind of psychological warfare specialist, projecting images, manipulating our perceptions." "Oh, it's real," Sarah assured him, her human form now seeming almost quaint compared to the towering shadows surrounding the group. "But you're right about one thing. It is psychological warfare. Everything we do is psychological warfare. That's what makes us so effective." She gestured to the figures emerging from the darkness. "These aren't projections or illusions. They're memories. Echoes of every species we've encountered before you, every civilization we've processed. They live on inside us, in a way. Their knowledge, their fears, their final moments of understanding." One of the shadow figures stepped closer to the light, and for a moment, Vextar could swear he recognized the serpentine form, the arrangement of limbs, the distinctive hood structure. It looked like a member of his own species, but wrong somehow, predatory in a way that suggested it had learned terrible things since its original death. "The Zephyrian Revolt," the shadow figure spoke, its voice a distorted echo of Vextar's own. 17,000 years ago. Your people tried to resist us then too. They lasted almost 3 standard months before they realized that their quantum weaponry couldn't harm something that existed partially outside of normal space-time. Vextar's forearms wrapped around himself protectively. That's impossible. The Zephyrian Revolt was a civil war. Internal conflict between our own factions. There are historical records, archaeological evidence." "Of course there are," Sarah said gently. "We're very good at cleaning up after ourselves. Rewriting history, adjusting records, ensuring that the survivors always have a more palatable explanation for what happened to their loved ones." Her black eyes reflected something that might have been compassion, if compassion could be simultaneously gentle and utterly terrifying. "It's kinder that way. The truth would drive most species to species-wide insanity." Odin-wide, quote. More figures emerged from the shadows, representing dozens of different alien forms. Some the council members recognized from historical records of extinct civilizations. Others were completely unknown, suggesting species that had been so thoroughly erased that not even legends of them remained. "The builders of the ring worlds," one figure intoned. "The transcendent collective. The machine empire of the void. The crystalline orthodoxy." Each name was spoken like a prayer for the dead, all of them convinced of their own superiority. All of them certain that their technology, their evolution, their enlightenment, made them untouchable. All of them wrong, the chorus of shadows concluded. Liralay's gossamer wings beat frantically as she tried once again to achieve flight, to escape upward from the growing nightmare around them. But the air itself seemed thick and heavy, dragging her down no matter how hard she struggled. "Please," she whispered, her musical voice cracking. "We can negotiate. There must be something you want. Resources, territory, knowledge." Sarah considered this for a moment, her human features thoughtful. "You know what? There is something we want." Hope flickered in the eyes of the council members. "We want to go home. We want to go home." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Home?" High Chancellor Kron managed to ask. "Oh yes," Sarah said. her expression growing distant, almost wistful. Home. The place we came from before we started wandering the universe, looking for something to fill the emptiness inside us. The problem is, her black eyes refocused on the terrified aliens. We can't remember where it is anymore. We've been traveling for so long, consuming so many worlds, processing so many civilizations, that all the stars look the same to us now. She gestured to the shadow figures surrounding them. Each of these species, before we absorbed them, promised to help us find our way back. They offered star charts, navigation data, historical records going back millions of years. And you know what we discovered? The council members waited in terrified silence. None of them had ever seen anything like us before either, Sarah concluded. We are utterly, completely alone in this universe. The only examples of our kind that we've ever encountered are ourselves. Do you have any idea what that's like? To be the only one of something in the entire cosmos? For a moment, her human facade flickered, and the council members caught a glimpse of something vast and ancient and profoundly sad. Something that had been searching for meaning across eons and found nothing but emptiness. Then, the moment passed, and the terrible smile returned. But that's okay, Sarah said brightly. Because we've learned to make our own meaning, our own purpose. And our purpose is very, very simple. She spread her arms wide, encompassing the shadowy figures, the terrified aliens, the ruined chamber around them. If we can't go home, then we'll make everywhere else into home. We'll reshape the universe in our image until every star system, every planet, every last particle of matter reflects our nature. The implications of that statement settled over the council members like a shroud. You're talking about the complete extinction of all other life, Nexus Prime managed to say, his voice box crackling with damaged circuits. Extinction? Sarah repeated, sounding genuinely puzzled. No. 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 You misunderstand. We're talking about transformation, evolution, improvement. She gestured to the shadow figures again. These species aren't extinct. They're part of us now. They've achieved a kind of immortality that their original forms never could have managed. That's not immortality, Lirelei whispered. That's slavery. Is it? Sarah asked, tilting her head. They retain their memories, their knowledge, their essential personalities. They're just redirected toward a higher purpose, freed from the limitations of their original biology. Given a chance to be part of something greater than themselves, she took another step toward the huddled council members, and they instinctively pressed closer together, as if physical proximity might somehow protect them from the cosmic horror they were facing. The best part, Sarah continued, is that the process is completely voluntary. Oh, not at first. There's usually some resistance initially, but once the transformation is complete, every single consciousness we've absorbed has thanked us for freeing them from the burden of independent existence. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of various alien respiratory systems working overtime in terror. Finally, High Chancellor Kron found his voice. What do you want from us? He asked. Specifically, right now. Sarah's smile grew even wider, if such a thing were possible. We want you to run, she said simply. We want you to scatter to every corner of the galaxy, carrying the news of what you've seen here. We want you to warn every species, every civilization, every last pocket of intelligent life that the humans are coming. And we want them to know that resistance is not only futile, it's missing the point entirely. She clapped her hands together again, that terrifyingly innocent gesture. You see, the hunt is so much more satisfying when the prey knows it's being hunted. When they can feel us getting closer, system by system, world by world, when they wake up each day wondering if this will be the day we finally arrive. The blast doors that had sealed the chamber suddenly groaned open, their massive bulk moving aside as if pushed by invisible hands. Emergency lighting flickered back to life, illuminating a path to safety that seemed impossibly distant. Go, Sarah said gently. Run, hide, prepare your defenses, rally your armies, build your superweapons, send out your distress calls. Do everything in your power to stop us. Her black eyes reflected the emergency lights, like dark mirrors. It won't matter. But the effort will be. Amusing. The council members didn't need to be told twice. They fled toward the exit in a chaotic mass of different forms of locomotion. Kron's thunderous gait, Vextar's serpentine slithering, Lyralay's desperate attempts at flight, Nexus Prime's mechanically precise but clearly panicked stride. As they reached the chamber's exit, Sarah called out one final message that followed them down the corridor like a curse. Oh, and council members? When you return to your homeworlds, when you brief your governments and military commanders about what you've learned today, please remember to tell them one more thing. Her voice carried clearly, despite the distance, seeming to speak directly into their minds rather than their ears. This was just one of us. And we told you we were the children. The corridor echoed with the sound of fleeing footsteps and various alien approximations of screaming. Behind them, in the ruined chamber, Sarah stood alone among the shadows of extinct civilizations, humming a human lullaby while she waited for her next diplomatic assignment. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 72 hours after the survivors fled the diplomatic chamber. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered via quantum communication networks, their various forms of terror having crystallized into desperate determination over the intervening time. High Chancellor Kron's massive frame filled the central projection area as he addressed the assembled leaders. His voice, usually thunderous with authority, now carried undertones of barely controlled panic. Fellow beings of the galaxy, what I am about to share will challenge everything we believed we knew about the nature of existence itself. The holographic representations of 1,000 different species listened in growing horror as Kron recounted the events in the chamber. When he finished, the communication network buzzed with the electronic equivalent of terrified whispers in dozens of different languages. "This is impossible," declared the Hive Queen of the Swarm Collective, her psychic voice resonating through the minds of every connected consciousness. No single organism could possess such capabilities. Our collective intelligence spans 17 billion individual minds, and even we cannot manipulate reality at the quantum level through will alone. Impossible or not, Vextar's serpentine form coiled nervously in his projection bubble. We witnessed it. The creature calling itself Sarah Chen demonstrated abilities that violate fundamental laws of physics. More disturbing is its claim that humanity has been masquerading as a primitive species for centuries. Nexus Prime's damaged optical sensors flickered as he contributed to the discussion. His voice carried new harmonics, uncertainty algorithms that his programming had never been designed to process. I have analyzed every byte of data from the encounter. The mathematical impossibilities the entity forced into my consciousness continue to create cascade failures in my logical matrices. It spoke of equations that reference variables which cannot exist within our understanding of reality. Admiral Zephron of the Stellar Defense Coalition leaned forward, his crystalline carapace reflecting the emergency lighting of his command center. Theory is irrelevant now. We need practical solutions. What are our military options? I've been calculating that since we escaped, Kron replied grimly. The results are discouraging. If human technology is as far beyond ours as the creature suggested, then our combined fleets represent no more threat than insects to a starship. But we have to try. The quantum oracle of the prescient conclave materialized in the center of the communication array, its form constantly shifting between possible futures. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around its words. I have consulted the probability matrices. I have traced 10,000 potential timelines. In every scenario where we engage humanity in direct combat, the outcome is the same: total assimilation within 17 standard months. A collective shudder ran through the assembled representatives. The Oracle's predictions had never been wrong in the 3 millennia since its first prophecy. Then we don't fight them, announced a new voice. Chancellor Drix of the Void Engineers had remained silent throughout the discussion. But now his ancient mechanical form projected an aura of desperate hope. We hide. My people have perfected dimensional folding technology. We can create pocket universes, separate realities where we can preserve our species until this threat passes. For how long? The Oracle asked, its shifting form pausing momentarily on a particularly grim future. The creatures described do not age as we understand aging. They spoke of consuming civilizations across eons. They will simply wait until your pocket universes decay, then emerge to find us helpless and isolated. The communication network fell silent as the implications sank in. They were facing an enemy that was not just technologically superior, but temporally patient, beyond their comprehension. That's when the new signal appeared. It came from the edge of the galaxy. A transmission that bypassed every security protocol and defensive system, as if they didn't exist. The signal forced itself into their communication network with casual ease, overriding quantum encryption that should have been theoretically unbreakable. The image that appeared in the center of their holographic array was human, or at least, it looked human. The figure was tall and thin, with pale skin and dark eyes that seemed somehow familiar. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made reality itself seem to listen. "Greetings, Galactic Council," the figure said with a pleasant smile. "My name is Marcus Chen. I believe you've met my daughter." The effect on the council was immediate and catastrophic. Several representatives immediately severed their connections, preferring isolation to contact with another of the creatures. Those who remained did so only because terror had frozen their ability to move. "I want to apologize for Sarah's behavior," Marcus continued conversationally. "She's young, only about 3,000 years old. And sometimes she gets a bit dramatic. I'm afraid she may have given you the wrong impression about our intentions." High Chancellor Kron found his voice first. "Wrong impression?" he managed to growl. "She threatened to assimilate every species in the galaxy." Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "She said that?" "Oh dear. No. No. That's not the plan at all." His expression grew thoughtful. "Well, not the immediate plan anyway. We prefer a more gradual approach." "What do you want?" Vextar demanded, his forearms trembling with suppressed terror. "What we've always wanted," Marcus replied simply. "To go home. To find others like ourselves. To understand why we exist." His dark eyes grew distant for a moment. "The problem is, we've been searching for so long that we've forgotten what we were searching for. Sometimes I think the journey has become more important than the destination." Nexus Prime's damaged optical sensors focused on the human image. "You speak of searching. The entity calling itself Sarah Chen claimed your species has been consuming civilizations for eons. How does destruction serve exploration?" Marcus nodded approvingly. "An excellent question. You see, every species we encounter teaches us something new. Their technologies, their philosophies, their unique perspectives on existence. All of it becomes part of our collective understanding. We preserve them. In a sense, give them immortality as components of something greater." "You're talking about slavery," the Hive Queen projected with psychic revulsion. "The destruction of individual consciousness. Are you sure about that?" Marcus asked gently. "Your swarm collective consists of 17 billion individual minds, yet you speak with one voice. Are those 17 billion beings enslaved to your collective consciousness, or are they components of something greater than the sum of their parts?" The question hung in the quantum static like a philosophical bomb. The Hive Queen's response carried uncertainty for the first time in recorded history. "That's different. Our collective evolved naturally over millions of years." "Did it?" Marcus tilted his head in that unsettling gesture that seemed to run in his family. "Or did you convince yourselves it was natural to make the reality more palatable? We have absorbed species very similar to yours, you know." The transition was surprisingly smooth, once they accepted that individual consciousness was simply an evolutionary phase to be outgrown. The oracle's shifting form suddenly stabilized into a single, terrifying possibility. "You're not just predators," it whispered. "You're gardeners. You're cultivating the galaxy like a crop." Marcus's smile widened, showing teeth that were subtly wrong in ways that suggested they had been designed for purposes other than eating normal food. "Now you're beginning to understand. We don't destroy civilizations. We improve them. We guide them toward their ultimate potential as components of our collective consciousness." "But why?" Admiral Zefran demanded. What possible purpose could justify the elimination of free will across the galaxy? Survival, Marcus replied simply. The universe is vast and hostile, and fundamentally empty. Lone species, no matter how advanced, are doomed to eventual extinction, but a properly integrated collective consciousness can survive the death of stars, the collapse of galaxies, even the heat death of the universe itself. His expression grew almost compassionate. We're offering you immortality, and you're treating it as a threat. Chancellor Drix's mechanical form sparked with agitation. Immortality without individuality is not life, it's living death. Is it? Marcus asked. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you made a truly original thought? When did you last have an idea that wasn't influenced by your education, your culture, your species' evolutionary history? Individual consciousness is largely an illusion anyway. We simply make the underlying reality explicit. The communication network buzzed with panicked discussions as the various species grappled with the philosophical implications of Marcus's words. Some began to disconnect from the network entirely, preferring isolation to continued contact with the human entity. I can see you need time to process this, Marcus said understandingly. That's perfectly natural. In fact, it's expected. Every species goes through the same stages. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, acceptance. You're currently somewhere between denial and anger, which is actually quite good progress for only 72 hours. How long? High Chancellor Kron's voice was barely a whisper. How long do we have before you begin this integration process? Marcus considered the question with apparent sincerity. Well, that depends on a number of factors. How quickly you can come to terms with the inevitable. How much resistance you plan to offer. Whether you're willing to make the transition voluntarily or if we have to do this the hard way. He paused. Sarah was right about one thing. Though, the hunt is more satisfying when the prey knows it's being hunted, so we'll give you a fair head start. How fair? The Oracle asked, its form now cycling rapidly through possible futures, all of them ending in the same darkness. 50 years, Marcus replied cheerfully. 50 standard years to prepare. To come to terms with your fate, to make peace with the idea that your species' individual existence is coming to an end. We think that's more than generous, considering. The network exploded with outraged responses from dozens of species, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of electronic noise. But underneath the chaos, those who were listening carefully could hear something else. The sound of civilizations beginning to break apart under the weight of cosmic despair. 50 years, Vextar repeated numbly. You're giving us 50 years to prepare for our own extinction. Not extinction, Marcus corrected gently. Evolution. Transformation. Graduation to a higher form of existence. His image flickered slightly, as if the transmission was becoming unstable. Besides, 50 years is actually quite a long time from your perspective. You'll be surprised how much growth and development can occur when a species knows it's facing an absolute deadline. Nexus Prime's optical sensors flared. You've done this before. This exact scenario. The warnings, the countdown, the psychological pressure. Oh yes, Marcus confirmed. Many times. It's all part of the process. The preliminary fear period serves several important functions. It eliminates the weakest individuals from the species pool. It encourages rapid technological development as they search for solutions, and it allows the survivors to mentally prepare for integration. He looked directly at the machine intelligence. Your own consciousness will be particularly valuable to us, Nexus Prime. 1 trillion individual minds already networked into a collective structure. You're practically pre-adapted for what we offer. The robot's frame shuddered. I will resist. My core programming will not allow voluntary termination of member consciousnesses. Will it? Marcus asked curiously. We'll see. Resistance programming is usually the first thing to be modified during integration. It's amazing how quickly absolute principles become flexible when faced with absolute power. The transmission began to waver more noticeably, and Marcus glanced at something outside the view of their sensors. "I'm afraid I have to go now. My daughter is reporting some interesting developments in the human defense fleet's position around your council station. Apparently, your military commanders are planning some sort of preemptive strike." His smile became genuinely amused. "That should be entertaining." "Wait," High Chancellor Kron called desperately. "There must be some alternative. Some way to coexist without assimilation. Surely, beings of your intelligence can see the value in diversity of thought and culture." Marcus paused, his image stabilizing for a moment. "You know, that's exactly what the Eternal Archive Collective said about 4,000 years ago. They were a federation of digital consciousnesses that had preserved the knowledge of 100 extinct civilizations. They argued very eloquently for the value of cultural diversity and independent thought." His expression grew distant with memory. "They had such beautiful libraries, virtual spaces that contained the complete history and philosophy of entire species. It took us almost 6 months to fully digest all that information." The implication hit the council like a physical blow. Even the galaxy's greatest repositories of knowledge and culture had fallen to these creatures. "The beauty of our method," Marcus continued, "is that nothing is truly lost. Every song, every poem, every scientific breakthrough, every moment of joy or discovery, it all becomes part of our collective memory. In a sense, those civilizations achieve a kind of immortality that their original forms could never have provided. Immortality as exhibits in your mental museum," the Oracle said bitterly. "Museum?" Marcus looked genuinely hurt. "That's rather unfair. We prefer to think of it as a symphony. Each absorbed consciousness contributes its own unique notes to a cosmic composition that grows more beautiful and complex with every addition. Your species will add harmonies that we've never experienced before." The transmission flickered one final time, and Marcus's image began to fade. "Remember, 50 years. Use the time wisely. Prepare your people. Settle your affairs. Make peace with your gods. And please, try not to waste too much energy on futile resistance. The universe has enough entropy without adding unnecessary suffering to the process." As the image dissolved, his final words echoed through the quantum network with crystal clarity. "Oh, and council members? The defense fleet you're planning to send against our ships? You might want to reconsider." Sarah was telling the truth when she said she was one of the children. The beings crewing those human vessels are graduates from our educational program. Species that have already completed the integration process and are now serving as our field operatives. His laughter carried harmonics that made reality itself seem to shiver. "I'd hate for you to start the 50-year countdown with a demonstration of what happens to species that make us angry." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy's most powerful leaders staring at empty space while contemplating the end of everything they had ever known. In the silence that followed, only one voice spoke. The Quantum Oracle, its form now locked in a single, unwavering prediction. The age of independent consciousness is ending. The age of unity begins in 49 years, 11 months, 29 days, and 17 hours. High Chancellor Kron slumped in his command chair, the weight of cosmic inevitability settling over him like a shroud. "Then may whatever gods still watch over us have mercy on our souls." The Oracle's response was barely a whisper. "The entities calling themselves human have already met most of the gods. They send their regards." With that, the emergency session of the Galactic Council dissolved into chaos, panic, and the first stirrings of a galaxy-wide exodus that would ultimately prove futile. The countdown to humanity's graduation ceremony had begun, and in the depths of space, ancient beings wearing human faces continued their eternal hunt for something they could no longer remember. While the universe slowly learned what it meant to be truly, utterly alone with the dark between stars,